In today's plate of history means I'll continue my look at Fort Worth, moving forward from the early days when the town was founded around 1850 to a time just 10 years later when the city became a stopping off point for cattle drives heading up the Chisholm Trail. It was during this period that a roughly 15-block area in Fort Worth became known as Hells Half Acre, or the Bloody Third Ward, a place where a cowboy looking to party could find everything he wanted and criminals ran wild. Fort Worth, the small army outpost founded by Major Ripley Allen Arnold and named after General William Jenkins Worth in 1949, grew up quickly. The town, little more than an army outpost in 1850 with fewer than 500 residents, mostly soldiers, grew to over 10,000 in just 10 years. But the town grew in an unconventional way. While most cities at the time, like Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, and Cleveland, grew because of the mills and factories that drew job seekers, Fort Worth became a modest-sized city because it provided a place for cowboys to blow off steam before embarking into Indian territory with gigantic herds of rangy longhorns. Hells Half Acre wasn't much if stacked up against modern entertainment capitals like Las Vegas or Atlantic City. It covered just a few blocks from 10th to 15th Streets, intersected by Throckmorton, Houston, Main, Rusk, and Calhoun Streets in downtown Fort Worth. Fort Worth's main economic growth came not from industrial production, but from saloons, gambling halls, brothels, and boarding houses. Early Fort Worth became famous because it provided liquor, gambling, cockfighting, horse racing, and sex to cowboys and rail crews who helped build Texas and, more importantly for the contemporary Old West with B.F. Biles, inspired many tales of the Old West. Given the success of Hells Half Acre, I suppose it's natural that Fort Worth became a haven for criminals and criminal activity at the time. Local Fort Worth authorities, aware that men and women running the saloons and brothels in Hells Half Acre liked to keep the cash rolling in, so to speak, were more lenient in their law enforcement standards. Consequently, the area noted for infamous establishments like the White Elephant and an estimated 20 other saloons and twice that number of brothels and small gambling establishments was noted for its colorful clientele. The district is associated with many infamous names like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Billy the Kid, and the Sam Bass Gang, as well as spurious quasi-lawmen like Luke Short and Bat Masterson. As for lawmen in Fort Worth, we don't know much about Sheriff Ben Shipp or Marshal Long-Hair Jim Courtright, two of the most notable of the men who supposedly rode herd over Hells Half Acre. Sheriff Shipp was present for a famous shootout between Courtright, who by that time was no longer Marshal, and was shot and killed by the gunslinger Luke Short. To give you an idea of how loosely Sheriff Ben Shipp regarded Short's crime, Bat Masterson, Luke Short's friend, convinced Sheriff Shipp to allow him to barricade himself in the jail with Luke Short. And Sheriff Shipp even allowed Short to have a pair of pistols lest a lynch mob should threaten him. As far as I can tell, no lynch mob appeared, however. They were probably too busy partying in Hells Half Acre to care. That's it for today's brief look at Fort Worth's colorful Hells Half Acre. Now it's time for part 2 of Chapter 15 of Hunting Charm. Remember, if you enjoy my content, give me a like and subscribe. Hope to see you again next week for another plate of history beans and another chapter from my novel Hunting Charm here on the Contemporary Old West with B.F. Biles. Hunting Charm, Chapter 15.2. Cecil Johnson busied himself with his usual chores. The bright spring morning contrasted sharply with his dark mood. He couldn't erase his doubts about the situation. The young woman seemed irrational, and he couldn't dismiss from his mind the disaster that would befall his family if Doreen decided to act on her threats. In his imagination, Cecil envisioned dozens of men brandishing pistols and torches descending upon their modest home. The men would pay no heed to Cynthia and his children's pleas for mercy. Neither would they pause to verify Doreen's lies. They would simply lynch them all and leave their lifeless bodies rotting upon a limb, or worse, instead of lynching, Doreen's would-be rescuers might burn his family alive or bind them by their feet to a team of mules and spook the animals to flay their skin. There were any number of terrible cruelties that white men, filled with self-righteous rage, might inflict upon them. Cecil felt his fists clench involuntarily. He stumbled through his chores, riddled with angst. When Doreen had threatened him on the trail, he had felt her bullying might be a passing whim, a remark made in desperation. Now that she had repeated the threat, however, he felt that he must act. The white woman had no concept of the damage her words might cause. If she did understand, she didn't care. Like most white folks, Doreen saw colored folks as something less than human. But could he kill her? Cecil wasn't sure. By force of habit, he led the milk cow into the stall and placed the bucket beneath her swollen udder. He didn't notice that Bessie gave more milk than usual. Later, when he saddled his mule and rode out to count his herd, he didn't note that 2 of his mares had produced males. It was only when he pulled out his Bible that he paused. Cecil had been reading from the book for several years. He had formed the habit during his days in the U.S. Cavalry when he learned to read. His teacher, one of the lieutenant's wives, had given him the weathered tome. Around 20 of his fellow soldiers had attempted to learn reading in Mrs. Reeves' classroom, but months after the class began, only Cecil and one other man, an Irishman, had come regularly enough to be able to read with any degree of confidence. "I'm very proud of you, Cecil," Mrs. Reeves had said as she presented him with the Bible. "You should read a bit of this every day as practice. You might also find that from time to time the words may guide you." The bindings of the Bible had loosened over the years, so Cecil handled it carefully. The book, with wide margins on the side of each page, was more than just a source of wisdom. It made for a handy notepad, a place to keep track of the number of animals he had at any given time. After jotting down the day's new count, he flipped to a random page. Mrs. Reeves had suggested the approach, saying that perhaps God might, on occasion, guide one to open the book to whatever passage one needed to read. That morning, Cecil prayed that God would guide him to a passage that would tell him what to do about Doreen Tarwater. The book opened to Proverbs. "The righteous shall never be removed, but the wicked shall not inhabit the earth. The mouth of the just bringeth forth wisdom, but the froward tongue shall be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness." He closed the book. Often the language of the Bible confused him. He had no idea what a froward tongue might be. Still, the rest of the verse made some sense. Unfortunately, the passage didn't settle the question in his mind. He had never contemplated or sought divine guidance for the commission of murder. He finished his chores, and as he did, another thought occurred to him. He had come to trust and respect Jake McQueen. Cynthia called the man her father. Jake had given them many gifts, blankets, firewood, food, and most importantly for his business, the use of grazing land and breeding stock. In fact, Cecil owed Jake money from the sale of the 20 mules. He had planned to wait a few days to get caught up with all his chores, but instead he would go the next afternoon to give Jake his share of the money and ask his opinion about Doreen Tarwater. Cecil hurried to finish his chores, then went inside to get Jake's money. He had hidden the gold from the sale of the mules, over $200, in the recessed space between the adobe wall and the log rafters of their home. After 5 years of having almost no cash, bartering chickens, eggs, and the occasional mule for necessities, the leather bag filled with coins felt like a fortune. Cecil had many plans for the money: a new corral, some tools, and a proper stove for the house, but Doreen's appearance had changed everything. Now he wondered if he should gather his family and animals and find a new home far away. "Go outside and play," Cecil said to his children. He wanted to speak with his wife. Cecil hadn't mentioned Doreen's threats before, but now he had to tell Cynthia. "I'm going to see Jake McQueen. Tell him I send my regards." "I need to take him his share of the money." Cecil paused, rubbing his temples. "What's wrong? It's that white woman, isn't it?" Cecil nodded, taking his wife's hand. "She made some threats against us. I didn't say anything about it before because it happened on the trail. When we found out she was hiding in Mr. Sugar's wagon, I said I'd send her back when we got home. She said if we took her back, she'd... well..." Cecil paused for a long moment, knowing his next words would cause his wife great distress. "She said if we sent her back, then she'd tell everyone we took advantage of her." Cynthia sat in stunned silence, then said, "Why didn't you tell me about this last night?" "I should have. I thought she was just fearful of us taking her back, that she didn't really mean it." "So why are you telling me now?" Cynthia looked at him keenly, then guessed the answer. "She said it twice now, didn't she? I had to go into the shed this morning to get some tools, and she just got upset. I told her to hush up, and that didn't set well. That's when she reminded me about how she said what she said." "That woman is the devil," Cynthia whispered. "The devil sent his servant in here to ruin all we worked for. I'm going to talk with Jake, see what he thinks is best." For a moment, Cynthia seemed to shrink. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes faded. "I don't want to leave our home. We worked hard on this here. Where will we go?" Cecil felt a deep sense of helplessness. He reached out and took his wife in his arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay," he whispered. It's gonna be all right." Unfortunately, Cecil couldn't be certain things would be fine. Cynthia was right. Everything they had built together could be taken in a moment if Doreen repeated her threats to the wrong person. He stood thinking once more that he should act right then. He reached for his rifle, mounted in a rack above the door. "What are you doing?" Cynthia asked. "That gal's folks in Kansas City probably ain't got any idea where she might be." "How do you know that?" I can't just let her ruin us." Cecil took the rifle down, then from their dresser retrieved a box of cartridges. "Cecil, stop!" Cynthia stared at him. "No, I'm going to end this. Don't try to stop me." "Look here, Cecil." Cynthia pointed at the wooden hills surrounding their ranch. "We gonna just throw everything away? Now stop for a minute. You was right before. We need to talk with Jake first, just like you said." "She's going to tell folks sometime or another. She has that terrible lie in her head, and it's going to come out. She's just that kind of gal. We ain't like real folks to her. We ain't nothing to her, just some colored folks that ain't worth more than a few dollars to buy or sell." Cynthia placed a hand on Cecil's chest and the other on the rifle. "We may need to kill her. God help us, but we may. Did you tell those folks in Abilene where we live? Think, Cecil." He paused for a long moment, trying to recall if he had taken the time to explain the location of their ranch to any of the men at the stockyards. White folks weren't much interested in talking about anything but my mules. I reckon I told them we live in Indian Territory. Indian Territory is a big patch of land, but there is folks who knows we're here. Did you tell them which tribe you lived with? Cynthia grasped her husband's shoulders, peering desperately into his eyes. "This is about your soul now, Cecil. Did you say how we lives in Creek Territory?" No, I don't think so." Cynthia took a deep breath, stroking her husband's arm to calm him. "So even if they know we live in Oklahoma, they can't possibly find us right away. Most likely it will take several weeks to figure out where we live. That means we don't have to do anything right this minute." "She ain't going to take our home." "A woman like that figures colors folks don't know much." A thought had occurred to Cynthia. "She figures as how she's smarter than us, and I'll just go on letting her think that. We need to find out if she told anyone where she was going. I'll talk to her. She ain't smart, not like she thinks. If we find she came here without telling anyone, then we can use this." Cynthia touched the rifle, looking directly into Cecil's eyes. "Remember, though, God don't take lightly to killing folks. We got to remember that." "God don't care about colored folks," Cecil said. "He doesn't care about us." "Yes, baby, he does. He cares, and he'll see us through this. Now you go on and you visit Jake. Take him his money and tell him about this white woman. See what he thinks."